Mafia boss daughter exposes the rich stepmother's secret life during the grand gala. The Hargrove mansion sat on the edge of Verona Hills like a crown atop a skull. Beautiful from a distance, hollow at its core. Elena Hargrove stood at the top of the marble staircase, her black gown pooling around her feet like spilled ink, and watched the guests arrive below. Politicians, bankers, socialites with pearls around their necks and secrets buried beneath their smiles. She knew every one of them, not because her father had introduced her to them, but because she had made it her business to know. That was the thing about being Dominic Hargrove's daughter. You learned quickly that information was currency, silence was survival, and trust was a luxury no one in their world could afford. Tonight was the annual Hargrove Grand Gala, the most prestigious event in Verona Hills. 600 guests, 3 Michelin-starred catering. A string quartet imported from Vienna, and at the center of it all, like a diamond set in gold, stood Vivienne Hargrove, Elena's stepmother. Elena watched her from above. Vivienne was breathtaking in a champagne-colored gown, her auburn hair swept into a flawless updo, diamonds at her throat catching the chandelier light. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, touching arms, whispering laughs, drawing people into her orbit like a sun pulling planets. Every man wanted her attention. Every woman wanted her approval. Elena wanted her gone. It had started 18 months ago, 3 weeks after Elena's father married Vivienne Castellano, a widow from Florence who had arrived in Verona Hills with a tragic backstory, a private fortune, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Elena had been living in New York at the time, studying international finance at Columbia, deliberately putting distance between herself and her father's world. When he called to tell her he was getting married, she had flown home expecting to dislike Vivienne for the obvious reasons: grief over her late mother, loyalty to her father, the natural resistance of a daughter watching a stranger step into family space. But what she found was something colder than jealousy. Vivienne was too perfect. Too composed. Too careful. The kind of woman who never slipped, never contradicted herself, never left a door unlocked or a drawer unguarded. Elena had grown up around people who operated that way. Her father's associates, his lieutenants, men who had survived 30 years in organized crime by controlling every variable, every impression, every room they walked into. Vivienne moved like one of them. It was the details that troubled Elena first. The way Vivienne positioned herself near windows during dinner parties, not admiring the view, but watching the driveway. The secure line phone she carried that wasn't linked to any carrier Elena could trace. The way she excused herself from rooms whenever certain guests arrived, particularly Marco Velli, her father's primary rival in the distribution network that stretched from Naples to Chicago. Small things, easily explained away. But Elena had her father's instincts, and those instincts were screaming. She began building a file. "You look like you're planning something terrible," said a voice beside her. Elena turned. Nico Vasquez leaned against the balcony railing, a glass of scotch in his hand, his jacket hanging open with the easy confidence of a man who had never once in his life been uncomfortable. He was her father's head of security, and Elena's oldest friend, if the word friend could stretch to cover something that complicated. "I'm always planning something," she said. "Tonight specifically, I mean." He nodded toward the ballroom below. "You've been up here for 20 minutes watching her." 18 months of watching, actually. Elena turned back to the crowd. "I'm almost finished." Nico was quiet for a moment. He was one of 3 people alive who knew about the file. He had helped her build part of it, reluctantly at first, then with increasing seriousness as the evidence accumulated. "Your father's going to be devastated," he said quietly. "My father survived 3 assassination attempts, a federal investigation, and losing my mother to cancer." Elena's voice didn't waver. "He'll survive the truth." She picked up the champagne flute from the railing and descended the staircase. The night moved in elegant, slow motion. Elena worked the room with the skill of someone who had been trained for it from childhood. She laughed at the right moments, deflected personal questions with charming misdirection, and steadily moved herself toward the people she needed to corner before midnight. The first was Senator Douglas Fenn, a silver-haired man in his 60s who owed Dominic Hargrove 3 significant political favors and was currently sweating through his shirt collar despite the air-conditioned ballroom. Elena found him near the bar, signaled the bartender for 2 more drinks, and slid beside him with a smile. "Senator? You look like a man who needs a conversation," he laughed nervously. "Elena, you've grown up." "Considerably." She handed him his drink. "Tell me something. How long have you known Vivienne was in contact with the Velli family?" The color left his face so fast she almost felt sorry for him. "I don't, that's not." "I have phone records, Douglas." She kept her voice light, pleasant, completely at odds with the content. 17 calls in 4 months between the private line Vivienne uses and a number registered to a shell company owned by Marco Velli's cousin in Palermo. I also have the deposit record for €240,000 transferred to an account in your wife's maiden name, which I suspect is less about your wife and more about keeping you quiet. She tilted her head. "How am I doing?" He stared at his drink. "I need to know what she told Velli," Elena said. "Specifically about the shipping routes my father renegotiated in February. I need to know what she handed over and when." The senator swallowed. There were documents, manifests, crew rotations. He wouldn't look at her. She said it was insurance. That she wasn't going to let Dominic keep her in a cage. Elena felt something cold move through her chest. Manifests, crew rotations. That was operational intelligence. The kind that got men killed. "Thank you," she said simply and walked away. The second conversation was shorter. Lillian Crane, the socialite wife of Hargrove's shipping attorney, had always been too friendly with Vivienne, in Elena's estimation. She found her on the terrace, mid-gossip with 2 women who scattered when they saw Elena's expression. "Elena, darling, I was just saying how magnificent the flowers are this year. Vivienne asked you to get into my father's private calendar. Last October." Elena stood close enough to make her uncomfortable. "His medical appointments. The ones for his heart condition. Did you think that was a strange request?" Lillian went rigid. She said she was worried about him. That he wasn't telling her everything. She was mapping his schedule around his most vulnerable moments. Elena kept her eyes steady. His cardiology appointments in the city, his overnight in Chicago in November, the night 2 of his drivers were ambushed on Route 94. "You gave her that calendar, Lillian." "I believe you." Elena stepped back. "Stay inside for the rest of the evening." It was 11:45 when Elena found her father. Dominic Hargrove was 62 years old, built like a retired boxer going soft around the edges, with iron gray hair and eyes the same dark amber as his daughter's. He stood near the fireplace in the east drawing room, deep in conversation with his accountant, and when he saw Elena's face, he dismissed the man without a word. "What's happened?" he said immediately. That was the thing about Dominic. He could read a room in 3 seconds, and he could read Elena in 1. "I need you to stay very still and listen to me," she said, "and I need you to not react until I've finished." He went completely quiet. That was the most frightening thing about him. Not the rumors, not the reputation, but the absolute stillness he could command when something important required it. She handed him the folder. It was 31 pages. Phone records, bank transfers. Copies of documents that had ended up in Velli's hands that could only have come from inside the Hargrove household. Testimonies, informal, uncertified, but detailed, from the senator and 2 others she had spoken with over the last hour. A timeline, color-coded, showing the correlation between Vivienne's covert communications and every significant operational setback Dominic's organization had suffered in the past 14 months. The Route 94 ambush, the customs seizure in Baltimore, the federal informant who had somehow known about the Hargrove safe house in Michigan. Vivienne hadn't been acting alone. She was operating as a long-term placement, what the old Italian families called a colomba, a dove. Someone sent into an enemy's inner circle, not to destroy quickly, but to hollow out slowly, feeding intelligence over months and years until the target was weak enough to collapse under a single coordinated strike. Marco Velli had been planning something enormous, and Vivienne had been the foundation of it. Dominic read every page. He didn't move. He didn't speak. When he reached the last sheet, the bank account in Lillian Crane's maiden name, the transfers that implied Senator Fenn's compromised loyalty, the secondary phone's call log. He closed the folder with the quiet care of someone handling something explosive. "How long have you known?" he asked. 14 months. I spent the first 4 building the foundation. I needed enough to be certain before I brought it to you. You could have come to me sooner. You wouldn't have believed me sooner. She held his gaze. You were in love with her. The drawing room felt very still. The sound of the gala filtered in from elsewhere in the mansion. Music, laughter, the clink of glasses. Where is she now? His voice was stone. Ballroom. Near the South Bar. She's been keeping Veli's regional coordinator, a man named Fausto Rimini, in peripheral sight all evening. He arrived as a +1 to the Benedetti couple. I suspect tonight was meant to be a handoff, final intelligence on your Mediterranean contracts before Veli makes his move next month. Dominic Hargrove set the folder on the mantelpiece. He straightened his jacket. He breathed once slowly. The Benedettis, he said, have been my guests for 11 years. Vivienne cultivated that access. Fausto was worked into their social circle in Naples 8 months ago. It was methodical. Elena paused. She's very good, Papa. She was trained by someone who understood your world completely. Veli's been planning this since before I met her. Before the introduction was arranged, yes. The Florence widow story was constructed. The grief, the fortune, real enough to hold up to surface scrutiny, but fabricated at its roots. Her legal name isn't Vivienne Castellano, it's Vivienne Mora. She's Marco Veli's second cousin by marriage. The silence that followed was the heaviest Elena had ever stood inside. Nico has 3 men positioned, she said quietly. Fausto Rimini is currently being redirected to the library, discreetly. 2 of your other lieutenants are managing the Benedettis. Nobody in that ballroom suspects anything is happening. She met her father's eyes. I handled the containment before I came to you, because I needed you to be able to walk back in there without knowing too much, too fast. You needed to be calm for what comes next. Dominic looked at his daughter for a long moment. There was grief in his face. The clean, terrible grief of a man recognizing a betrayal so deep it reshaped everything he thought he'd known about a chapter of his life. But beneath it was something older and harder. The part of him that had survived 3 assassination attempts. The part that had built something from nothing and protected it for 30 years. Your mother, he said slowly, would have seen it inside a week. She taught me what to look for, Elena said. I just needed longer. He picked up the folder again, tucked it under his arm, and nodded once. The exposure happened at midnight, as the clock in the grand hall began to chime. Not dramatically. Not with shouting or tears or the operatic confrontation that a lesser strategist might have staged. Elena had inherited too much of her father's temperament for theater. Vivienne was standing near the South Bar, her champagne glass half raised, laughing at something a diplomat's wife had said, when she became aware, with the particular animal instinct of someone trained in deception, that the temperature of the room had shifted. It was subtle. The way certain men repositioned. The way Dominic re-entered the ballroom and moved toward her, not with affection, but with the measured, deliberate calm of a man who had already decided everything. The way Elena descended the staircase a second time and stood in the center of the room where she was visible to everyone without looking at anyone in particular. Vivienne set down her glass. She looked at Dominic. She looked at Elena. And in that fraction of a second, before she composed herself, before the polished widow's mask reasserted itself, Elena saw it. The flicker, the calculation, the rapid, futile reassessment of every exit. There were none. Elena had spent 14 months making sure of that. Dominic reached Vivienne and leaned close to speak to her quietly, the way a man might lean in to tell his wife how beautiful she looked. Nobody nearby heard what he said. Vivienne's expression didn't crack. She was too skilled for that. But she set down her glass, took his arm, and allowed herself to be walked, gracefully and quietly, through the eastern corridor and out of the ballroom. 2 of Nico's men fell into step behind them. The gala continued. The string quartet launched into Vivaldi. A senator laughed too loudly at someone's joke. The chandelier threw its light across 600 people who had no idea that something seismic had just quietly concluded beneath their feet. Elena stood alone for a moment in the center of the ballroom floor. Nico appeared at her elbow. Clean? Clean, she confirmed. Fausto? Having a very uncomfortable conversation in the library, he'll be handed to the right people by morning. And the senator? Sweating peacefully by the bar, he'll cooperate. Elena exhaled. It wasn't relief exactly. Relief was for people who hadn't been planning long enough to feel the weight of the ending before it arrived. It was something more like the particular quiet that follows a storm that was always going to come. You know your father's going to try to keep you closer after this, Nico said. He's going to want you involved. Formally. I know. Is that what you want? Elena picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. She looked around the ballroom, the glittering, treacherous, magnificent world she had been born into and spent years trying to maintain a careful distance from. I want to finish my degree, she said. Then we'll see. Nico almost smiled. You took down a Veli plant who had your father fooled for over a year, neutralized 3 compromised contacts, and coordinated a clean extraction in the middle of a 600-person gala. He glanced at her sideways. What exactly are you studying? Finance, she said. He laughed, genuinely, the rare kind, and Elena allowed herself the smallest smile in return. Somewhere in the eastern wing of the mansion, her father was learning the full shape of what had been done to him. That would take time to process. There would be hard months ahead, the fallout from Veli's exposed strategy, the restructuring of compromised operations, the long and careful work of shoring up what Vivienne had spent more than a year quietly dismantling. But the foundation was intact. Dominic Hargrove was alive, informed, and in control. And Vivienne Mora, the dove sent to hollow out the Hargrove empire from within, had found, to her considerable misfortune, that the daughter of the house had been watching from the very beginning. Later, when the last guest had gone and the mansion was quiet, Elena sat in her mother's old chair in the library and listened to the house settle around her. Her father found her there at 2 a.m. He looked older than he had at the start of the evening. Not broken, but excavated, as though the night had scooped something out of him that would take time to fill back in. He sat across from her without speaking for a while. She said something. He offered finally. Before Nico took her out, she said you were wasted studying finance. Elena looked at him steadily. She wasn't wrong, he said. Elena turned back to the window, where the lights of Verona Hills spread below like a scattered constellation. Beautiful, intricate, and full of secrets not yet found. Get some rest, Papa, she said. He did something he rarely did. He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, the gesture of a man who understood, perhaps for the first time with full clarity, exactly what his daughter was. Then he left her to the quiet, and Elena sat with her cold champagne and the particular satisfaction of a chess player who had seen 40 moves ahead and executed every single one. The Hargrove Gala would be remembered, by those who attended, as the finest in a decade. The food, the music, the flowers, the effortless elegance of it all. Nobody who had been there that night could say exactly when Vivienne Hargrove had left, or why her husband had looked so composed for the rest of the evening. These things happened in certain circles, and people in certain circles understood without being told that some questions were never worth asking aloud. Marco Veli's coordinated strike against the Hargrove network, planned for the following spring, never materialized. The reasons were never made public. Elena Hargrove returned to Columbia and completed her degree with distinction. What she did after that is a longer story. The world Dominic had built was still standing. And now, for the first time in 14 months, every crack in its foundation had been found. Not by an enemy, but by the one person in his life he should never have underestimated. His daughter. Mafia boss daughter exposes the rich stepmother's secret life during the Grand Gala.